Welcome to another video. Tonight we have 9 stories, from tales of haunted dolls, cryptids, and much more. If you have a story of your own, it can be sent to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. These videos do take me quite a bit of time to create, so if you're feeling generous, and if you feel this video is worth one, please be sure to drop a like rating. It helps the channel more than most think. Subscribing if you're new is also immensely appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. For my whole life, I had lived in that nowhere town, nestled in the woods of central Ontario, just off Highway 144, where the pines were tall and the days were cold. Since I was young, I'd wanted out, not only because of my fear of becoming a townie like my peers were destined to be, but because of my family. I had a rough childhood, one I'm not keen to get into. Suffice it to say, my home life alone was enough to convince me to leave and never come back. So at age 19, with nothing but a trunk of clothes and personal items and my aunt's hand-me-down 2007 Toyota Corolla, I did just that. That night was the straw that broke the camel's back. Things had been rocky since Mom had passed away, and after a night of beer, breath, beratement from my father, I just couldn't take it anymore. I remember being so angry I could have cried. I wasn't thinking straight. I know that now, but I don't regret it. The lights of the town faded out behind me in the rearview mirror. I should have been happy. I should have celebrated. Called up my friends from out of town and asked them to make a spot for me on their couch, or recommend a good motel to crash in. But as I drove in the dark, all I felt was a crawling dread. My friends had offered me a place to stay countless times, even just for a night. I'd always turned them down, convinced myself that I could do this on my own, that I didn't need anyone's help to get out of here. I guess I was right, after all, though. That pit in my stomach just got deeper and deeper. It wasn't so bad that I needed to leave, really, but I shook my head. I didn't let myself cry or turn around. I didn't let myself feel a thing at all, honestly. I was just doing it to prove a point. I could leave, even if I'd be back eventually. I'd pushed those thoughts out of my head, though. I didn't need any distractions, but I should have seen it coming then, right? I wasn't distracted by any emotions. I was just staring straight ahead. I should have seen it, right? I have trouble recalling what happened that caused my car to crash. I must have just hit my head, but there was no bruise, no pain. There was nothing in front of my car. And then it wasn't there anymore. There was a bang as my tire popped and I swerved to the side, coming to a skidding halt on the dirt road. I jumped out of the car, looking around in confusion to see what I'd hit, but there wasn't anything there. Not a sharp rock or tire spikes. Not a deer or dog or any other animal. I swore to myself when I took my phone out, finding it unable to turn on. The welcome sign on the outskirts of town was right behind me, staring me down mockingly. I looked down the road, even though I couldn't see very far. There was a light in the distance, yellow and blue and white just within reach. I took the keys and wallet out of my car and locked the door behind me and started walking down the road. It didn't take long to reach the lights. Just off the side of the road, there it was. It was the size of a supermarket, with warm yellow light emanating from inside. It looked just like a normal grocery store, albeit an unpopulated one, with large glass windows at the front to entice those outside to take a peek at its wares. Above the entrance, there was the name of the store, in big neon blue bubble letters, SoloMart. I'd driven out of town this way dozens of times and I'd never noticed it. But I wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. I figured I could ask to use the landline and maybe get a snack for the road while I was there. I walked into the store, hands shoved into my pockets as I glanced around in search of a staff member. I've always hated asking for help at grocery stores, and being the only person in the store aside from staff only makes it worse for some reason. I started to slink through the aisles, hoping to run into someone. The place made me feel really on edge for some reason, like I'd been here before. The sense of deja vu I got just from standing in the canned food aisle made whatever appetite I had dry up immediately. "Hello, sir. Welcome to SoloMart." I nearly jumped out of my skin when someone came up behind me. I rolled around to face the employee. He was just a regular-looking guy. Of course he was. What was I thinking? He was a little shorter than me with brown hair, wearing a blue polo shirt with a name tag clipped on his chest. Keith, it read. He looked familiar, but I was sure I'd never seen him before in my life. I knew I'd never met him, but he had the face of someone who I'd known since I was young, but hadn't seen in years. It made me feel something I can't describe. "Hey, sorry, do you have a landline I could use?" I asked. He blinked at me for a long moment like he didn't understand what I'd said. I was about to repeat what I'd said, thinking he hadn't understood me, but before I could, he cleared his throat. "Landline? Right, yeah. Of course, sir," he said, sounding confused at first, but something more aware as he spoke. He stood there for a long moment. "Hold on. I'm sorry. I'll need to check in the staff room for a landline." He didn't meet my eyes, looking through me rather than at me, with a strange, glazed-over expression of bland, polite joviality. "I'll go look for a phone. Why don't you take a look around the store while I do that?" "Are you okay?" I asked. His expression didn't change. I got a strange feeling like something was on the tip of my tongue. Have we met before?" He didn't respond, didn't even give me a look as he turned on his heel and walked away. Weird. I figured he was probably high, or maybe just sleep-deprived. I felt bad for the guy, but he still left me with the hair on my neck standing on end, and a wary feeling weighing on me. I figured I'd pass the time by walking around. The store truly was empty. The only sound coming from my footsteps and the music that played from the speaker system. It sounded old, like someone had deep-fried the sound quality of an old 50s commercial track. I rounded the corner of one of the aisles, into the frozen food section. There was a stand with free samples, where another person was standing. She had long blonde hair and brown eyes, wearing the same uniform as Keith. I squinted at her. Was she Samantha? I asked, cocking my head at her. She stared straight forward for a moment, with a blank expression on her face, before blinking and turning to look at me with a bright smile. "Hi, I'm afraid not, sir," she said. I blinked a few times and... oh, I guess she wasn't her. I could have sworn she was, but when I blinked, she looked like a complete stranger. I glanced at her name tag. Jane. "Oh, sorry. I thought you were someone else," I said. Embarrassment crept up my neck at the situation I'd put myself in, so I tried to curb my discomfort by looking down at her table of free samples. It was ice cream, I think. She had a big tub of the stuff on the table, a plastic container of pale purple frozen something. The container had the word Exy Whip written on the lid, and sighed in loopy white script on a dark purple background with little white stars, like a night sky. Next to the tub of ice cream, there was a tray of little paper cups with tiny portions of Exy Whip. I'd never seen it in a store before. "It's vegan. Would you like to try it?" she asked jovially, breaking me out of my contemplation. Yeah, sure, I said, picking up one of the little cups. She handed me a tiny spoon to eat it with. Thanks, I'm just gonna walk around, I said. For some reason, the way she looked at me made me feel just so uncomfortable. She hardly blinked, just stared head on at me with that same blank smile that Keith had. I wandered away, taking a tentative bite of the Exy whip. It was sweet, marshmallowy, like some weird kind of blue moon ice cream. It had a strange aftertaste, like a sugar-free sweetener, that made me grimace. Yuck. I tried another bite to make sure I didn't like it, and yeah, no, that's real fucking bad. I wondered why they even carried the stuff. I started looking around for a garbage bin to toss it in, wondering where the fuck Keith had gone, and what was taking him so long. As I walked down the frozen food aisle, I started to feel strange. My steps got sluggish, and my head began to hurt, almost like a brain freeze, right behind my eyes. I winced, holding my head with my free hand and looking down at the melting cup of Exy whip with confusion. What the hell were they putting in this shit? My head spun, sparks appearing in my vision, my ears beginning to ring, and I think I blacked out. I must have. I remember falling to the cool tile floor and my vision going dark. I think I dreamed. I dreamt I was somewhere, like a void of dark purple. Ahead of me there was a purple spotlight, shining down on a spot far away. I think I tried to run to it. It was like running through syrup on a treadmill, not making any progress despite running myself dry. I shot awake suddenly. I expected to wake up in my room back home, the weight of blankets on my back and the smell of cigarettes and beer from downstairs. But I didn't. I woke up right where I'd fallen down, in the frozen food aisle of SoloMart. It couldn't have been long since I fell, right? But when I looked around for Jane, she was missing from her samples table. I decided to go looking for her and Keith, my vision still swimming as I stood. I rubbed my eyes, and in the freezers where there would normally be all manner of brands and boxes, all that was there were boxes and tubs labeled with the same branding as I'd seen on the Exy whip. Exy cheesy bread, Exy fries, Exy rolls, Exy chow, all Exy brand, with that dark purple background and loopy white text. I turned to the shelves behind me. Exy chips, Exy munch cereal. You get the picture. It wasn't like that before. Everything was normal before. I held my head, starting to walk down the aisle. There was a squish under my shoe. I looked down, grimacing at the puddle of purple slime the Exy whip had melted into. I didn't pay it any mind, trying to wipe it off on the floor to no avail. I shrugged it off and kept walking, and kept walking, and kept walking. Had this aisle always been this long? It stretched out in front of me like it was a mile long, making my head throb. I turned around and started walking towards the free samples table, rounding the corner from the frozen section towards the bakery. The music was similar to how it had been before, but more high-pitched, faster, like someone was skipping through it. Hello? I called out, walking past a display of purple loaves of Exy bread. Jane? Keith? Is anyone there? There was no answer. Not a peep aside from my footsteps and the music overhead. I could feel anxiety rising in my chest. Fuck this place. I could just go back to my car and hitch a ride off someone. Maybe go back home and just wait for my dad's drunken anger. I turned down the nearest aisle and stopped dead in my tracks. Down the aisle there was someone. Something. I don't know what I'd call it. It was in the shape of a person, I think. Like a shadow, or the absence of light altogether. In the shape of a person carrying a basket. It was looking at products like it was just a normal customer. I felt sick. all my hair standing up on end and my heart beginning to pound. I rushed away from that aisle, looking for a way past it, only to find the aisles filled with more and more of the things, all shopping like normal. I don't know why I was so afraid. I just ran, looking for somewhere away from the things, but they were everywhere. When I turned around to find somewhere away from them, they were in the places I had been before. I had to find Jane. I had to find Keith. At least they were normal. At least I knew what the hell they were. It felt like the store was stretching in front of me, like I wasn't making any progress at all. Frustration and fear and despair all mingled in my stomach. A lump forming in my throat as my hands began to shake. And then in front of me, the staff room door opened. Those familiar but odd faces in front of me brought me the most relief I'd felt the entire time I'd been in this strange place. Jane? Keith? I called out, finally able to run towards them. I didn't even notice the strange expressions on their face until I was just a few steps away. What's going on? What? I tried to stammer out a question, feeling breathless. Keith reached out and gently patted my arm. It's okay, Andrew. We'll keep you safe. He sighed, that same glazed smile on his face, as if nothing was wrong. Jane grabbed my arm, gently pulling me towards the entrance of the staff room. You can hide in here until they go away, she soothed, with that same tone. Her voice was so familiar it made my head hurt. I wanted to follow them. They were the only thing I could understand in this place, but my fear began to return. I looked past them into the staff room, but it wasn't there. A purplish starry void was all that was there. A familiar void, but a void all the same. I felt like throwing up, balling my quivering hands into fists to hide my fear. I can't. I took a step back, but Jane squeezed my wrist hard, still staring at me with that smile, only growing more manic. It's safe here, Andrew, she said. You'll only get hurt if you stay out there, Andrew, Keith said through gritted teeth, barely masking his frustration. I stepped back again, trying to wiggle my arm free. Let go of me, I whispered, my voice strangled by the tightness of my throat. Keith grabbed onto my other arm, trying to help Jane drag me towards the staff room. I leaned back, going dead weight, and finally managing to yell, "Let me go." It startled them just long enough for me to get my arms free and stumble back, but I didn't make it far before Keith jumped at me. We both fell to the ground and I screamed, but I couldn't get much else out, because as soon as he righted himself, he wrapped his hands around my neck and began to choke me. His eyes were manic and feral, teeth gritted. Drool dribbled out of his mouth and hit my cheek. I struggled under him, grabbing his arm, but then Jane was there, grabbing my wrist and pulling my hand away. She wrestled my arms down onto the ground and put her knees on them, holding me down. Then she gently held my face in her hands, tipping my face up to look at hers. Her eyes had gone purple like the void, full of white stars. Just relax, Andrew. It's better this way, she said in my mother's voice. I sobbed, squirming under her and trying to pull away from them. She wasn't her. She wasn't. She wore my mom's face like a Halloween mask stretched to fit over an unfit base. It's better this way. It's easier this way, she promised. My breathing was getting short, my mouth gaping open like a fish out of water and desperately trying to drag in air that wouldn't come. Purple, starry ooze began to drip from the monster's eyes, hitting my face and sliding down, mingling with my own tears. It hurt. It all hurt. I couldn't breathe. That sludge burned my skin. That thing's hands dug in harder. My eyes rolled up in my head. I was in that dark void again, purple light far ahead, out of reach no matter how hard I ran. I looked behind me, where the dark only got darker, more unsure. It would be easy to keep running. I'd get there eventually. It would be better eventually. If I could just wait, I could fix it. If I just stuck around, I had to fix it. I looked back at the purple light and turned towards the uncertain void. I began to run, finally making headway through the slow, honey-thick air. Dark hands reached out to me. My eyes shot open with the air I still had left. I rolled my head back, closed my eyes, and screamed for help. There was a moment of nothingness. I thought I'd died, but then I heard shouting. I opened my eyes, looking around me, and those things, those shadows, they grabbed Keith and Jane off me. When I sat up to look, they were deflated, like they'd been suits that no one was wearing anymore, flattened and empty. I stared at them for a long moment. One of the shadows reached out to me. I flinched back, looking up at its featureless form. I reached back hesitantly and took its hand. It helped me to my feet, dusting me off and speaking backwards. A question. I nodded. They let me lean heavily against them. I didn't trust my legs to carry me. I was so tired. The other shadows parted for us to walk past, looking at us with reserved curiosity. I glanced back behind myself and they began to fade out of sight, until the one holding me was the only one left. They slowly shifted, letting me stand on my own. They gave me a thumbs up and faded away. I let my eyes close. I was standing in the middle of the highway when I opened my eyes. My phone vibrated in my hands. I lifted it to look. My father's number was displayed on the screen. I hit the cancel call button. I looked behind me, and my car was right where I'd left it. I walked towards it shakily, and got inside to shield myself from the cool night air. Melted Exy Whip smeared on the floor of my car under my shoes as I shut the door behind me. I scrolled through my phone to my friend's number and called them. I'd need a ride out of there. I wouldn't be coming back. I've always been a depressed person. Even from early childhood, I have struggled with an almost insurmountable sadness that has plagued every corner of my life. Therapy, pills, love. Nothing seemed to snap me out of my never-ending funk. Once I turned 18, I was out of the house, on my own. My parents begged me to stay, worried for my mental health. I promised them that me leaving would be a good thing, that I would be better on my own. What a crock of shit that turned out to be. If anything, I just grew more isolated. Loneliness that had always been with me expanded. How I felt truly alone. The isolation of being stuck with my own thoughts, my only escape being a dead-end job, just made everything worse. When my parents would call, I'd lie and say everything was fine, that there was absolutely nothing to worry about. And there wasn't, really. Yeah, I was a miserable, depressed man, lonely as they come, but this was normal for me. This had always been my life. Things were worse, but not too different. I was a frog in boiling water. It had gotten hotter, but it was gradual enough that it just felt like the same old depression. Nothing new, except for Gracie. Gracie was a tattered cloth doll with dark brown yarn hair, black button eyes, and a deep frown. She wore a knitted maroon dress and little buckle shoes. When I was first scoping out apartments, the prospective landlord pointed around. And that, he said, pausing for dramatic effect, is why rent is so cheap here. He pointed over to Gracie, who sat in a small rocking chair in the corner of the room. I remember laughing, thinking it was a sort of weird joke. My eyes met with his, and I could tell he was serious. That's Gracie. She doesn't leave here. I felt a wave of confusion as I looked over to the old doll. Comes with the place? I asked, unsure of what to say. He nodded. You live here? You're free to get rid of her, if you really want to. I wouldn't, though. I didn't like the sound of that, but alas, rent was cheap and I was desperate for a change of scenery. My parents' worry had recently grown more suffocating. It's a pretty doll, I said. At least she isn't porcelain. That'd be really scary. I chuckled to break the tension. The landlord remained stone-faced. So, despite an odd start, I moved in. I've never been particularly superstitious, but I'm also not one to seek out the paranormal. As long as Gracie kept to herself, I decided to let her stay in her little corner. The first 3 months were relatively event-free. Every once in a while I'd hear a bump in the night, but other than that, things were chill. It didn't start ramping up until the dreams began. In them, I was always in bed, crying. I'd sob and sob until I'd hear the door open behind me. A shadow with long, clawed fingers would slink in. It'd envelop me, its overwhelming darkness squeezing the life from me. I'd scream once and it grew angrier. I'd scream again and the fear would intensify. But on the third scream, always the third, I'd wake up. I'd sit up in bed, soaked in sweat. In the corner, even in the dark, I could feel Gracie's eyes on me. When I'd flick on the lamp beside me, I'd see her like she was waiting for me to awaken. Those dreams seemed to happen every other night. Eventually, they were a nightly occurrence. I began to dread coming home from work, having to force myself to sleep. My depression was soon replaced by fear. Sure, I was still miserable, but now I was miserable and scared. I decided to be proactive and try to take control of the horror. One day, I picked up Gracie and walked her outside to the trash can. Sorry, Gracie, I said. I can't keep doing this. I put her in and closed the lid. I wasn't completely sure she was the cause of everything, but if it's not her, then what? I was desperate to fix my problem. That night, I lay in bed, less frightened than before. It was time to test my idea. I could feel myself drifting away to sleep when I heard a loud crash outside my room. I sat up, gripping my blanket tightly. Reaching over to flick on my lamp, I was startled to find that it wasn't working. I could feel beads of sweat forming on my forehead. I had never felt so alone. I considered my options, bolting for the door, out the window, calling 911. Then my door slowly began to creak open. It slowly slid wider until it burst completely open, slamming against the wall behind it. I screamed as a tall, dark figure stood in the doorway. The figure from my dreams. It shambled forward, thrusting itself into the room. It fell to the floor and began to roll towards me. My eyes couldn't believe what I was seeing. It moved like a rolled-up carpet until it leapt onto the bed. My scream was cut short and it raised a big clawed hand into the air. It laid it onto my face, covering my mouth. I began to toss and struggle against the entity. It uncovered my eyes. Mouth still covered, I looked at it and met its gaze. It had big yellow eyes that burrowed deep into me. I heard a noise rumbling from it, despite the fact that it had no mouth. Where's Gracie? It said. With a free, shaky hand, I pointed outside towards the window. Gracie, it said, finally uncovering my mouth. It slinked off my bed and crawled out of my bedroom and into the darkness. I got up and ran to the front door, straight to the trash can outside. I uncovered it, and sitting atop all the trash was Gracie. I picked her up and ran back upstairs, setting her down in her little rocking chair. I stayed up all night, but the entity never returned. As the days went on, the dreams grew more and more sporadic, until they stopped completely. It's been a year since I last had one, but I've still kept Gracie in the corner of the room. I've been looking for new places to move to. Honestly, I might just go back with my parents. They care about me. They're worried for me. I thought being on my own was better. Now I'm not so sure. All I know is that I'm still miserable, but things could be worse. Who knew a doll and its shadowy owner would be the key to appreciating life? The night I got the specimen was hot. Humidity hung on the breeze, weighing it down, a telltale sign of the coming summer storm. Wind slid through the palm fronds outside, and faintly, the waves crashed into the shore, gnawing at the land. I had been working nights at the lab. Now the new kid being made to lock up might not have flown back to the mainland, but out here the laid-back atmosphere of the tropics had permeated even the dusty halls of academia. For some of us, at least. One last sample to prep and preserve, and then I could doff my coat and slink away to the bar, get a Mai Tai, and wait for the coming storm in a haze of pot smoke and Jimmy buffet. I pushed the trolley over to the counter and placed a cloth-wrapped jar on a waterproof mat. It was about a foot tall and half that in width. Before getting my hands dirty, though, I took a look at the field notes that accompanied its recovery. The specimen was found on Dive 4, right from the heart of the reef, or it would have been if they had found it in the water. Apparently it was clinging to Danny's BC rig where he got back on the boat. When they tried to pry it off, Professor Adams lost a finger to it. When they subdued it, and then they got it into a jar. It had been on ice for about a week, so I figured my fingers would be safe. Hell, maybe the professor would let me go home while the sun was up if I got their wedding ring back before setting this little fella up for a permanent stay in the archives. Due to the urgent nature of its capture, the scientists in the field didn't get a chance to even begin IDing the thing. So that would fall to me too. That Mai Tai was looking even further away now. I undid the string holding the jar's cloth covering together and got my first look at the thing. It was for the most part pale and translucent, nothing like the colorful reef fish that we usually cataloged. Large, bulging eyes and a mess of tentacles sagged out of a pearlescent, nautiloid shell that glimmered remarkably under the fluorescence of the lab. Its shell was lined with ridges and lacked the darkening associated with thicker shells and keratinous beaks seen in other mollusks, and yet it must have been at least half an inch thick at the opening. Sitting between its eyes and atop a bulge of flesh sat an operculum, so thick I couldn't imagine any kind of sea creature getting past it without great difficulty. I gloved up and cracked the lid. The stench was awful. The week on ice had done nothing to slow the buildup of sulfur and decay. I equipped a face mask on the off chance that there was a little extra stink waiting to pop out of some gas-filled tract and removed it. It was heavy and required 2 hands to hoist it onto the mat. When laid out, the creature appeared to be a cross between several cephaloid species. A bulbous head with large eyes like an octopus, but with the shell and ring of many smaller tentacles around the beak. I counted 60 or so. Of a nautilus. I parted them and found the beak, a deep red of all things, indicating perhaps a different structural protein than other mollusks or the incorporation of a mineral. I turned away from the stinking mass and peeled my gloves off. My hands sweat in gloves even in an air-conditioned lab, but here in the tropics, and that special kind of summer, heat that lingered long into the night, and that was compounded by the humidity of the looming storm, well, my hands were gross, to say the least. I wiped them down and grabbed a few keys to mollusks of the region and laid them out opposite the specimen. 4 years of undergrad and 1 of honors, and I had never seen anything quite like the specimen, but all science is done on the shoulders of giants or something, so it was with that in mind that I thumbed through the worn pages of taxonomic keys and field guides. As I consulted the literature, the specimen began to warm up, and slowly burbled a sulfurous gas from deep within the shell. The stench was wretched, like seagrass rotting on the shore after a storm tore up the meadows. I couldn't handle it, and figured inviting in the light rain that had started spattering the window of the lab was worth even a moment of relief from the sensory assault that was my evening. Curiously, by the time I sat back down, the burbling had stopped. Instead now, something was happening that threatened to bring even greater punishment to my olfactory senses. The exposed body of the beast was swelling, presumably with more gas. As it expanded, it strained against the confines of its shell until, with a wet snap, the entire creature slid free of the iridescent shell. The full length of the mollusk lay there on the table, with one large, distended bulge. I figured this gently pulsing bulge to be the stomach and remembered the professor's ring. After all this trouble, the professor may even trade 2 nights off for its return. I hopped over to the window and leaned out, breathing deeply and holding it. I returned to the table, moving the keys to one side and fetching a scalpel. I wiped sweat and rainwater from my brow and pressed the steel into the pale flesh of the specimen. Gas hissed from the cut, and even with my breath held, I couldn't help but tear up. Still, I persisted. As I ran the specimen, though, rain hit the window with vigorous strikes as the storm neared. I opened the creature's stomach, and what I saw next took me some time to process. Inside the stomach of the specimen, I saw the professor's finger, their dark skin now a pallid, almost alien gray, as if the person whose finger this was had lived their entire life underground, or at the bottom of the ocean. The gold of their wedding band glinted in the glow of a lightning strike, and then my eyes took in the full picture. Tiny white veins extended from the creature's stomach lining and into the finger, pulsing steadily. I couldn't tell if they were vascular or something different entirely. The fingernail was bright red, in the same fashion as the specimen's beak. As I saw the severed end of the finger, I gasped in horror, inhaling a mouthful of the putrid gas. My head was spinning as I struggled to comprehend what I was looking at. Hanging off the severed end of the professor's finger was a tiny, white, shriveled humanoid connected to the finger by the same white veins that connected the finger to the stomach. No. The womb. I locked eyes with the creature. Its tiny black beads felt as if they were burning as they saw me. It gasped for air, perhaps its first breath of anything other than the sulfurous gas of its mother's innards. And with this first breath of air, it let out a piercing shriek. I cupped my hands over my ears, still gripping the scalpel. The shriek made my head throb until something snapped within my mind, activating my fight or flight response, and I screamed in horror back, driving the blade into the creature with a nervous swiftness. The last thing I remember is a stream of metallic, blue blood spraying over me as I blacked out. Sometime later, I was woken up by the thunder of the storm. Now hanging low over the island, the floor of the lab was wet with rainwater. I propped myself up against the bench and looked around. The specimen was gone, save for its heavy, gem-like shell. A trail of the same thick, Hemocyan-rich blood that coated me led off to the sample tray and down onto the floor next to me, and then up the bench near the windowsill, and outside off of the second-story window of the laboratory. I peered out into the darkness and saw only the palms, undulating as the wind slithered through the fronds, lit by the warm street lamps and cool blue flashes of lightning. The storm's breeze carried the sound of waves still gnawing away at the shoreline and, faintly, in the distance, that same piercing howl. As I handed over money to the barista, the edge of the note carved into my soft skin, making me grimace in annoyance. A single bead of blood welled on my fingertip. I despise paper cuts. Despise the fact that after the initial sting they faded from memory, hidden until triggered by something sour or something spicy or something salty. A lingering phantom of potential, unexpected pain. Too close a mimic to real life, I suppose. Sighing, I strolled back to my lonely apartment, a repurposed, dingy industrial warehouse on the ground floor, where I both lived and worked. A desk, a bed, a couch, a kitchen, some books, and a few plants. Home, bittersweet home. Picking up the unread mail on my desk, it occurred once more. A paper cut on the fingertip of my left hand. 2 in one day, I exclaimed out loud, cursing my luck. Figures. Increasingly annoyed, I crashed into my work chair, deciding to finish the last dregs of my open project, falling asleep not too long after. I am a creature of habit and schedule. Every morning I wake up at 6:30 a.m., grab a breakfast sandwich from the closest store, get some work done, grab another sandwich for lunch, which I eat on a park bench, back to work, rounding off my night with dinner and Netflix. That morning, however, as I grabbed my paper wrap sandwich, I felt another cut on the back of my knee. At this, both of the paper cuts on my fingertips throbbed in response, like 3 stings of an angry wasp. What the hell? I cursed out loud, getting a quizzical look from the store owner. Storming over, I slammed the sandwich on the counter in frustration. But as I pulled out a note from my wallet, slice. This one on my inner wrist. Yet again, each of the other cuts flared fresh. Startled, I abandoned the sandwich, running back home instead. What the hell was happening to me? Dashing over to my bookshelf, I grabbed a book. Slice. I grabbed a magazine. Slice. I touched photographs, a brown paper bag, fish from my trash, toilet paper, and on, and each time, slice. Each cut somewhere random, each cut triggering the others, each cut welling a drop of blood. Every time I touched paper, my skin tore open anew. Determined to identify the threshold of my predicament, I put on oven mitts and picked up a magazine. Slice. Double-mitted. Slice. I wrapped my double-mitted hands round and round with my bed sheets until it was thicker than a pillow. Slice. 2 pillows. This time, nothing. Meaning there was a limit, but nothing workable if I ever wanted to be both functional and handle paper. Perhaps someone cursed me. I thought erratically. Was it the barista I snapped at for taking too long with my coffee? The homeless man I had escorted away by the police because I was uncomfortable that he used the alley by my house to sleep in? The woman being harassed at the bus stop whose plight I chose to ignore instead of defend? I ran through every scenario in my life, but nothing felt unordinary. It was just my average, tedious existence. I scoured the internet looking for anyone with symptoms similar to mine, searching and researching well into the night until I fell asleep on my keyboard, exhausted. Searing pain jolted me awake, every paper cut on my body burning, droplets of blood oozing from each of them. I looked blearily at the clock. 6 a.m. Why had I woken up so early? My body still felt drained, unable to sleep despite my fatigue. I made a cup of coffee. When my mind eventually settled, something clicked. 6 a.m. It appeared that, for every 10 cuts, I lost 15 minutes of sleep. A slice of flesh traded for a fraction of peace. I told myself I should be grateful. We live in an almost paperless world, one easy to navigate without cash or letters. Yet the thought wasn't comforting enough for me to do nothing. So I decided to head to my local clinic. One thing you forget about medical facilities are the forms. Endless pieces of bureaucratic hurdles to fill in with the minutiae of medical life. I refused, of course. and began a heated argument with the nurse about how I couldn't touch paper and had to see the doctor right away as a matter of urgency. My mouth was gaping open to scream in frustration when, just at that instant, the doctor walked out to the lobby. She looked at my panicked face and waved me into her room, ignoring the protests of the reception nurse. "Tell me what's wrong," she said. I took a deep, steadying breath so that I could answer calmly and not appear any crazier than she likely thought I was. "I have paper cuts all over me that never heal. They appear randomly on my body anytime I touch a piece of paper." Much to my surprise, she didn't react or kick me out. Instead, she put on a pair of gloves, asking me to show her a few of my cuts. I pointed to one on my fingertips, one on my wrist, and one on the inside of my knee. She examined each closely, reaching into her drawer to pull out what looked like a magnifying glass. She even swabbed each one of them several times with a cotton gauze, pressing down to pick up blood. Finally, she took off her gloves and looked at me with a serious expression. "I'm baffled. I can't see any cuts, but I can see drops of blood on the cotton swab where I pressed against the places you pointed out," she said, showing me the blood-spattered gauze. "I need to talk to my colleagues so I can establish what kind of tests to run. There's no need to poke and prod you without warrant, even if your case is perplexing. It doesn't appear to be life-threatening, so we can afford to wait." At her words, I began to cry in relief. She handed me a box of tissues as I tried to compose myself. "Come in next week, and hopefully I'll have something more concrete for us to work on. In the meantime, I'll give you a mild sedative to help you sleep. I'm going to, put my numbers in your phone so you can contact me when you need to. Just take it a day at a time. You don't have to do more than that, okay?" It was hard to remember the last time someone had been this kind to me. I nodded, handing her my phone in gratitude. I thanked her profusely. Medication and a plan of action was more than I had hoped for. That night, I took the first pills while I called in someone to check my apartment for mold. I had heard certain types of fungus can cause adverse physical reactions or hallucinations. The consultation fee was exorbitant, but was worth the price of my sanity. They found nothing, so I continued to avoid paper, not wanting to push my luck. Then 2 days later, while sitting on the park bench eating my lunch, it happened again. I felt a cut slice into the back of my neck and I jumped up in shock, frantically looking around to find the culprit piece of paper. I saw nothing but leaves carried on the wind. In a rising panic, I sprinted back home. Dumping my clothes, I curled up in on the floor, trying to soothe my anxiety away. In a short while, feeling a bit more self-possessed and assuring myself it was probably errant debris, I decided to try and catch up on some work in an attempt to distract myself. As I sat down and put my hands on my work desk, I felt the flesh tear upon on the bottom of my feet. I jerked away from the table. No. Oh no. Bench, table, wood. I would have screamed if it wasn't for shock. It can't be. I repeated to myself as a mantra, hands shaking uncontrollably. I walked to the kitchen and picked up my wooden salad bowl. Slice. I began to wail, deep, wrenching sobs at the helplessness I felt. I cried for hours and hours, finally falling asleep on my cold, concrete floor. Upon waking, I steeled myself with new resolve, pulling my mattress off the wooden slats of my bed. I dumped it on the floor instead, repeating the process with my couch cushions. Then I went to the ATM, withdrawing as much money as I had. My regular store had wooden floors, a detail I never noticed, so I kept walking. At a large discount mart a few miles away, I stocked up on groceries and non-perishables, ignoring the judgmental glare of the suburban mom behind me. I insisted on plastic bags at the checkout counter. Then I holed up, surviving, if not living, counting down the days until my appointment. Perhaps she would have learnt enough to fix me. Then yesterday, as I touched the metal handles to open my front door, a thin sliver of epidermis tore open in my inner thigh. I looked at the door handle. Metal. Surveying my apartment, my mind registered my fridge, my kettle, my pans. I thought about the subway and its grimy metal transportation tubes, of crawling cars choking the streets with their fumes, of handrails on staircases, of every door handle in every building. 15 minutes for every 10 cuts. Resignedly, I sat on the floor and called the doctor. I told her what had happened, told her I couldn't come in, told her to call me if she found an answer. Then I hung up. Paper, wood, metal. What comes next is inevitable. Our world is plastic. It is everything, in everything, even us. I wonder how many people know that scientists have found microplastics in human beings, solid particles of man-made chaos creating nano-abrasions as they float in our bloodstream. So here I sit, typing on my plastic keyboard while I still can, waiting. I used to live on a patch of farmlands. I'm only writing this now as I have experienced something last week that has reminded me of what I've come across and denied, and one that nearly cost a life or two. The backstory is largely irrelevant, as the incident was sudden. This starts when I first had the experience to see it unfold in my childhood. Where I lived, there was a large rural patch of lands, and I was an incredibly outdoorsy type of person. I resided in a small cottage that rested on fresh grass the animals would feed on. My dad owned a flock of healthy sheep, who provided us with good quality milk, mutton, and wool. The typical day was me going out in the creek to collect and release the minnows that darted in the clear water. I was fascinated by everything, and I'd rush to the wildflowers and observe as the bumblebees buzzed around them, with their pollen baskets full to the brim on a bright sunny day. Occasionally I would see the swallowtail as it fluttered across the weeds which grew, and I was also keen on watching the rabbits and hares leaping across the pastures. My passion for the outdoors and nature was something that caused me to form some extremely pleasant memories, where I'd exhaust myself out inside the day, and return with the family to hydrate myself with fresh, pastured milk from our big ewe. When I was about 5 years old, an unusual occurrence began to unfold. Every now and then, we'd find a sheep that had been attacked and mangled. We'd assume it was a canid or perhaps a bear, but something about the way these particular sheep were killed seemed odd. Throughout my stay in the old area, we'd come across 18 sheep that died in the exact same way. They'd been eaten from the inside, and for each one, the back of its head was stabbed, as if whatever had killed them particularly targeted this location every time it attacked a sheep in the flock. These weren't old deaths. Very recent, in fact. We'd still see the blowflies swarming around the recently exposed flesh, their bright metallic colors glistening in flight. A month after these occurrences came a day I'd never forget. I remember this night as clearly as the date had happened. My parents, uncles, and aunts gathered to discuss what's been going on with the lambs. It started off as some disease or a loose bit of machinery that these unfortunate creatures caught themselves in, but the discussions became dark, including topics about wild beasts or a dominant ram killing the younger lambs. My dad then dismissed me and my siblings, ordering us to go to bed. Thus, I never knew what they discussed fully, but that wasn't important to the events that unfolded. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I'd woken up to use the restroom and I'd come back to lie on my bed. We had a window in our little cottage which I'd always peek out of before sleeping, and today was no different. I watched a young lamb walk into the scene. It scratched the ground under it to create a comfortable place to rest. There were no other sheep, and it was the only animal at this location. I watched with a warm smile on my face as the lamb rested on the depression in the dirt. It was a pleasant sight for me, and the half moon was bright enough for me to see. After what was about a couple of minutes, I saw a shadow loom behind the lamb. I was overwhelmed with confusion. Dad and Mom were asleep, and my uncles and aunts had returned to their homes. I felt the thumps in my heart begin to speed up. It moved forwards, revealing its hands. I may have been a child back then, but I knew this wasn't human. I couldn't really describe it back then. It was long, spindly, and the arms were equipped with talons. Within seconds, my confusion had formed itself into fear. The thing stepped into frame, and when I saw its face, I covered my mouth as I was about to scream. It looked human, but twice as large. It was bald, stooping, and had a large, frowning mouth with its teeth hidden within. I watched it approach the sheep, and it brandished the talons on its arms. Without making a sound, it plunged them into the back of the sheep's head. Its neck went limp and outstretched its legs, and I watched as the sheep's nerves kept firing. After a few seconds, the sheep had become completely motionless. The hunched creature sliced an incision in the sheep's stomach and began to feed. I trembled in my bed. I could not describe the horror I experienced as I watched this monstrosity commit this carnage. In pure silence, as not a single noise was made. It had finished feeding, and it raised its head, turning away to leave. I suddenly, without any warning, sneezed. The beast abruptly stopped and turned to look towards me. I felt my heart literally stop. The creature's eyes glowed as it stared at me for a few seconds. It walked towards me, and as I opened my mouth to let out a scream, lunged forwards and bit the neck of the sheep, carrying the cadaver, and then walking away, only to disappear. The encounter wasn't very detailed, as I'd been a kid, but it haunted me. I hadn't been able to sleep for a full minute. The next day I narrated the whole thing to Dad. However, he dismissed it as a dream. He'd never believed me, and had what happened last week not taken place, I would have believed him fully. The killing of sheep stopped there, and we'd never seen a sheep go missing when we lived there anymore. 6 years later, we moved to an urban town, and the encounter with the thing had been buried in my memories, something I denied and eventually forgot. Upon moving, I'd met one of the neighbor's sons with whom I'd become great friends with. His name was Henry. We were both boys, and he was a year younger than me. He was somewhat frail, with light brown hair and gray eyes with a hint of blue. He was slightly shorter than me, and I was a year older than him. We shared very similar hobbies, which helped in us becoming the friends we are. When I was 16, I thought it would be nice for us to visit the old cottage for a week. The location was somewhat far, but the road was isolated, and it wasn't too rocky. I figured out we'd be there by bike. We packed our supplies, which included a fishing rod, a lighter, a few blankets, squeezable shampoo bottles we'd fill with water and use to wash up after doing our business, a few water tanks, a pot to boil the creek water so we don't ingest any dangerous pathogens, a bar of soap, and a shovel. I almost took my pocket field guide that I'd made myself back when we lived there. I divided the supplies between me and Henry, and packed them in cylindrical bags, whose straps wrapped around our chests. Before leaving, I went to my dad's basement and fetched an old, slightly rusted pistol and a tin which contained its bullets. Henry looked at my hands as they brandished the weapon. "What's this for?" he inquired skeptically. I, who lived in these lands for years, answered almost instinctively on the spot. "Lest we find a hare or two to eat," I replied. The look on Henry's face seemed to relax, and within about an hour we departed. I waved goodbye to my father and thanked him as he gave us the supplies. He also provided us with 2 sheepskin jackets, warning us that it's been cold back there. It was a long and tiring journey, but it was safe. Henry and I rested our bikes on the walls of the cottage, which was fared well through all the years. We rested our exhausted legs and soon made our way into the house. We chose to stay in my bedroom, as it had 2 beds and plenty of space. We unpacked and discussed about our plans for the week. The day was relatively bland in relation to the story, and so were the days leading up to the event. For the sake of the story, I will only talk about the days it happened. In the afternoon, I'd requested Henry fetch some water from the creek, and if he needed anything, he'd call for help. He was back in about a minute, clutching the full water tank in one hand, and in his other hand was something. "What's that?" I asked. "I don't know," he exclaimed. He ran to me and I held my hand out for him. He loosened his grip and I observed the thing. It was a glossy black creature, which looked like a centipede with front legs, and they were long. It was about twice the size of my middle finger. It had powerful jaws and a flattened head. As I watched the creature writhe, I was overwhelmed with a sense of nostalgia. I looked up at Henry, who was staring at me expectantly. "That's a hellgrammet," I told him. "It turns into a Dobson fly, and it looks like no other bug you've seen." I immediately reached for my field guide and flipped to page 59, and there it was. A crude illustration, but recognizable nevertheless. Henry stared at the illustration of the full-grown animal. I would describe it as having the large wings of a dragonfly, ash gray with a brown shade, a strong, robust body with a dragonfly's abdomen, and the thorax and head of a carabid beetle. Its mandibles were long, like scimitars that clashed together. The drawing didn't do it justice. "It's an indicator of good water quality. They don't tolerate pollution," I continued. Henry then returned the insect back to the creek, and the day went on normally, until night fell. Deep into my slumber, I felt something crawl on my back. I dismissed it as some sort of weird dreamlike event. Eventually, it felt unbearable. I jolted out of my bed and looked at what was causing this itching sensation. It was Henry, his hand tapping at my back. Recently, he'd been increasing physical with me, and it felt off. I never asked him what was going on when he did, but now I was immediately asking. "What are you doing?" I asked, irritated. I was tired and beyond confused. He hesitated, looking at me before he began to speak. "There's something that doesn't make sense here," he replied with equal confusion, ushering at the window. I got out of bed and looked. It had begun to snow. We were in the middle of spring. What was going on? Henry stood next to me in utter confusion. My irritation formed itself into a sense of interest. "Perhaps it's a weather anomaly," I said with uncertainty. "They were common here. Sometimes it'd pour buckets in summer, and sometimes we'd have scorching days in January." That seemed to reassure him, and soon enough, he was fast asleep. The next day went on as usual, until the sun set. We went to sleep, or more accurately, I did. I woke up from thirst, but before I got up, I saw Henry lying next to me. I was enraged. "What's the meaning of this?" I yelled. Without any hesitation, Henry got up from my bed. "I'm genuinely frightened," he began with an audible tremble in his voice. "I know you have different creatures in the rural lands, but I'm not sure if you've ever seen it." "What do you mean, it?" I asked. My rage began to subside, and again I was confused. "The thing," he replied. "What thing? Could you describe it to me?" I demanded. He immediately listed the creatures of what he saw out that window, and as he did, my heart sank. He talked about a gray, human-like creature. He said it stopped over with a hunched back. It was bald and twice the size of a human. What got me was how he described its hands as having talons. I came to my realization and what happened a decade prior. "What's wrong?" he stammered, looking into my visible expression of fear. I grabbed my father's pistol, loaded it, and gestured him to come with me. We ran into the now snowy landscape. We wandered into the night with my pistol locked in my right pocket and a few provisions in the other. I made sure Henry was always alongside me. I needed to find the answer to this. I needed to know. What I saw at the age of 5, the thing that haunted me for a year at most, has returned to my mind. All I could think of was the thing Henry had described to me. What stood out the most were its talons and hunched back. He'd also told me about its long neck, like a swan with the head of a withered man. My mid was so focused on the thing I had forgotten I was able to defend myself against it. We had wandered about a kilometer from our cottage, and then without warning, I fell to the ground. I helped myself to my feet and glanced behind my back. I only saw it for a split second, but that image was something I could never find enough words to describe. It was monstrous in proportions. Its long arms possessed more muscle power than any human being's entire body. Its legs were bent like that of a human, and its feet resembled hooves. Its hands were plunged into the snowy ground, and I had not seen the talons. It had a long neck, like a swan's, just the way Henry had described it to me. Its head was bald with a huge frown, a gaping black mouth which hid the teeth of the beast. Its eyes were like flashlights, radiating a bright, white, reflective sheen. Henry was calling for me, using my footprints as a guide. I sprinted in their direction. I yelled for Henry to follow me. I sprinted through the snow, and soon enough, I began to hear his shoes crunching against it as well. I felt relieved, knowing he was fine. However, the thing had begun its pursuit of us. I could not see how it ran, only the softness of its sprinting. That thing had never made a sound in its life, not when it killed a sheep before my very eyes, not when Henry saw it, and not when it chased us through the snow. That's what I found the most horrible. The fact that it does not go all out on you, but does what it can to ensure you go without emitting a whisper. I felt the cold air rushing into my lungs, and its temperatures causing them to feel as if they'd been encased in a packet of ice. I ignored the pain. My body began to ache and my legs weaken, but we continued to sprint, and then I pointed towards a standing wooden wall. I ran to the refuge behind it. Henry then came next to me, lacing his fingers between mine. I didn't care at this point, but then it hit me. "The pistol," whispered Henry, his voice tired from the cold. The pistol. I thought to myself, how could I forget? I immediately took it from my pocket and unlocked it, ready to fire at the thing. With Henry's hands clasped in my right and the pistol ready in my left, I vigilantly peeled behind the wooden wall. Before I even reacted, the wooden wall shattered. The thing kicked at me with its leg, slamming my back against the sharp splinters. I collapsed to the ground and it swung its neck towards Henry, and its jaws shot out like a shark's does when it reaches out to bite out of the corpse of a deceased whale. It threw him without effort, and I saw his body get tossed at least 10 meters away. It then slowly walked towards Henry as he struggled to lift himself. I could barely move and watched as the creature looked at me, as if to say nobody is going to save you. It turned its head to Henry, and then everything went black. I believe I'd gone unconscious for a few seconds, but I was suddenly woken up as I heard Henry's screams. It was heartbreaking. I have never heard such a sound of fright and despair come from anybody. I tossed my hand against the snow, desperately prodding, until I felt a short metal rod. I threw myself forwards and grabbed the tossed pistol. The thing was too preoccupied with Henry to even notice I was getting up on my feet. I looked and raised the firearm, clenched in both hands. It had begun to use its talons to claw at the cloth that covered Henry's calf and was getting ready to tear into the muscles in his legs. I felt my own legs. I could not describe the agony I was enduring. I felt as though there were wasps in my knees, stinging my vulnerable joints. I felt as though my tendons were being poked at with pins that have been held over a fire. My legs buckled as I struggled to hold the iron ring of the gun at the body of the beast. I tried to aim it away from Henry and close my eyes, pulling the trigger as much as I could. I heard several gunshots and then my body fell to the ground, giving up in exhaustion. I opened my eyes, and the thing was looking at me. It lumbered away from Henry, whose screams faded as he looked at the thing. I watched it, and red pools began to form at certain parts of its body, before it turned to streaks, which ran down its grayed out, wrinkled skin. I had shot the thing at least 5 times. It let out an exhale before it turned from us and limped away. That was the only sound I ever heard come from it. There was a silence for a few minutes, and then Henry got up. However, I myself was still lying down on my back, supported by my arms. I saw a few scratches on his shin, and the snow had seemed to absorb the impact of the throw. He trudged in my direction, and once he was close enough, hurled himself at me. Henry told me in a tight embrace, and with a voice filled with horror, exhaustion, and pain, uttered these 2 words: "Thank you." Henry laid his head on my chest and broke down. I felt my eyes sting along with immense pity, but also relief. I raised my back and threw my arms around him. I felt my shirt soak, hearing nothing but Henry's sobs. It went on for a few minutes. "Don't worry, it'll be alright," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. Henry began to calm a bit, and soon enough, I began to see the rays of sunlight peek over the horizon. I managed to get up, holding my hand out for Henry. I helped him on his feet. "It's gone. We know our way back, and we'll be home early," I reassured him. He wiped his tears with the sleeve of his shirt, and a subtle smile crept on his face. Our journey back home was, again, long, but we never encountered anything like it again. I narrated the story to my relatives, of whom nobody believed me with the exception of my dad. As for me and Henry, it strengthened our friendship and we became inseparable. Considering all this happened just a week ago, I don't know what's going to happen with this in the future, but one thing I'm grateful for is that it did have some good results on me. I, however, would never forget the night. I stayed up 2 separate nights just by thinking about this encounter. There's an old road in my hometown that runs through some very old land. The woods there are protected because they're part of an old watershed that fills reservoirs downstream, which provide water for half the state. So it would be very bad if that water were tainted. And so the land is protected, and so the land is old, as is the road. And so some very strange things have been seen on that road, and in those woods, though most people don't believe what they see. I do. Today, I will tell you about the wolf pack. Why wouldn't someone believe I saw a wolf pack? Wolves aren't uncommon, especially not in our neck of the woods. At least, not ordinary wolves. And when I first met them, that's what I thought they were too. Ordinary wolves. But if they were, perhaps I wouldn't be here to tell you. But before I can tell you about the pack, I have to tell you about one in particular. Names have power, and I don't know what he is or what they are. So I will refer to this one as the Red Pup. He's likely not a pup by now, but when I met him, that's how he appeared to me. I grew up in the woods. My family has always lived next to that old land, and it became my backyard. I found my wanderlust in those old woods. The fauna, the flora, the rocks even, entranced me. My father taught me about mosses and lichens, how to track animals. A family of beavers became my neighbors. The mountain became my true home, and to this day, I cannot live away from the mountains. I wandered those woods often, though my mother had a fantastic rule to keep me safe. If your shadow is longer than your body, come home. I didn't always follow that rule, though. I got lost in thought sometimes. More lost, perhaps, than some get in the woods. And so one day as a young boy staying too long at the fault lines in a rock, did not notice that not only had my shadow grown long, but it had grown faint. The woods were growing dark, and in old woods, things move about in the dark. I heard a rustling in the bushes and I was scared. I knew there were bears and coyotes in these woods. I did not expect what I believed at the time to be a small dog. I don't know how to describe how I was equal parts terrified and delighted in that moment. I had just noticed it was dark. I had just noticed that something small was walking towards me. I knew there were things out here in the dark that could hurt me. I did not know that this cute, squeaking, fumbling brown thing was that looked altogether not threatening and shyly nosed my hand. His fur was a deep brown color, though again it was dark. But his eyes, they were warm and misty, like a wisp of steam from your cocoa that dances and moves and is easily blown away, yet returns just as easily. His fur was warm, and he nosed at me to get up, so I did. He took a few steps away and looked back over his shoulder. Even a child understands this look. I followed him. He led me over some rocks, under some logs, around some boulders. The wind brushed my bare arms. It was summer, but the night was still colder than the day. He dropped back and walked beside me, leading me with my palm on his shoulders. Looking back, he was much more aware of the things going on around us than I was, and much more concerned. He kept looking back behind us and tugging me along with renewed fervor. I will never know what followed us. That might be a good thing. It was dark enough by the time we reached my backyard that I couldn't see the grass anymore. He stopped at the edge of the woods and nudged me onward. I looked back at him and he stopped backward, vanishing into the dark. Once again I became afraid and turned and ran towards the lights of my parents' house. My mother scolded me for not coming back sooner, sat me on timeout for a half hour, and I was not allowed to have dessert that night. I looked out the window for my wolf pup friend. I did not meet the red pup again until a few years later, while I was out hiking with a friend. I had grown up a bit and had advanced in school. I knew more about the woods now. I was more aware of the dangers and how to avoid them. We get bears there, but they don't bother me. Most people don't realize bears are timid creatures that just like to be left alone. They are only fearsome when they are provoked and have something to defend. Still, don't bug them. They want to be left alone, mostly. People who don't know me well enough call me an idiot because I don't respect the woods, but they are usually people who don't know the woods like I do. It would be more accurate to say I don't fear the woods, and even more accurate to say that I don't fear being hurt by it if I show it proper respect, which I try my best to do. We were out hiking with my friend Steve and his dog, a young German shepherd named Smokey. He's dead now. He lived to be 13 before being put down due to crippling joint pain, but I think he was 3 years old at the time and loved hikes. Steve lived near a different part of the same old woods. It's a very large forest and an even larger mountain, with lots of hills and glens. We took Smokey for a walk along some of the old quad trails. We were in our teens and didn't mind the dark so much. We walked until the sun was nearly down, and we built a fire pit. We both loved fires. Who doesn't? They're warm, bright, display woodsman skill. You can burn things if you're into that. I tried to take pictures of it and draw it. While we were sitting, I spotted a glint in the darkness, sort of like what you would see on the back of an animal's eyes. I looked up and saw the eyes looking down at us, then looked over to Smokey, curled up next to Steve. Interesting. Smokey usually knew what was up. I checked that Steve and I both had sticks and knives handy, and eyed a particular stick in the fire that was sticking out part way. I could grab it easily if I needed a fire weapon, but the eyes drew no closer. They stayed put right there, settled over a rock a good distance from the fire. They seemed unnatural, not like the reflective glint of a real animal's eyes. They were misty, like smoke on the water, like a mirage I wasn't sure I was really seeing, and at this distance, Smokey should have noticed. I felt a bit intimidated and decided to point it out. Steve looked where I pointed, and Smokey perked up as we both moved. But Steve couldn't see anything, and I figured I was imagining things. I wasn't confident the eyes were actually there after all. Perhaps they were a reflection from a few pieces of glass. Someone might have thrown a bottle into the woods for all I knew. I would never do such a thing, but we weren't the only people who came back here. After a while, we doused the fire and followed the trail back in the dark, Smokey following ahead or behind us at his whim. I heard something move through the leaves and turned, expecting to see Smokey next to me. The shape was right, but this wasn't Smokey. The fur was the wrong color. This was a deep chocolate brown with hints of crimson. It looked up at me and those eyes. It was the same wolf pup. His eyes truly are strange. They were my first real clue that he wasn't natural. They glisten and glow a warm, fiery light, as though they truly are flames, flickering, moving so that you can never focus on any bit of detail. But if you just stare unfocused, there they are. I believe I've already described them as a mirage. I put my hand out and he walked next to me so that my hand fell on the back of his neck. I could hear his panting and he sounded happy. I called to Steve and told him my wolf pup had returned. Immediately, Steve turned around and looked where I was gesturing. But he couldn't see anything. He turned on his flashlight, and though I could clearly see the light falling on the animal beside me, revealing brilliant, russet fur, Steve insisted there was nothing there. He stepped forward to touch the spot I insisted I had a young wolf standing, and the wolf pup moved out of the way, like he didn't want Steve to touch him. I expressed this, and Steve just rolled his eyes and accused me of making it up. I got angry. I don't lie. And I could definitely feel the fur beneath my hand. So Steve just said sure, whatever, and started walking back towards the house. The red pup nudged me along, so I followed. He walked a bit away from me for most of the trip, but I was glad to have him there. It was like seeing an old friend again for the first time in a while. I smiled at him, and his eyes radiated a very kind warmth. We made it back to the house, and once again he stopped at the edge of the woods, not entering the property. He turned and looked at me from his side, before walking slowly back into the darkness of the woods. I almost wonder if something else was out there that night as well. It was a year later that I saw him again, and this time, I met his pack. I was out with several friends this time. We were in the woods behind our friend Devin's house, having a big fire. We scouted out a good spot earlier in that day. A nice clearing where the trees weren't close enough to catch fire. The stump of a tree had been ripped out long ago, leaving just a few stubborn roots and a nice little hollow about 2 feet across. My friends all gathered rocks while I kicked leaves away from the hollow, forming a 10-foot radius of just dirt and roots, then returned to the little hollow and built a round wall for the fire. My dad was an EMT and on search and rescue, so through him I'd met some of the rangers and fire marshals in the area, which meant I knew the rules for a safe fire, but they wouldn't destroy when they found it. These are protected woods after all, and the rangers will destroy any fire pits that don't meet their standards to discourage drunk teenagers from causing problems. At least a foot high on the outside, a 1.5 feet on the inside, and 10 feet or more to anything flammable. They never removed fire pits that I built. We got the fire going, had some drinks, cooked a steak that my friend brought. It was a great time, and we were a good half-mile through dense woods from the nearest house, Devin's. A potential danger if you're thinking like a parent, permission to be jovial and rambunctious if you're thinking like a teenager. As the night went on, the air got cold, quite cold for a summer night. The wind had picked up too, and we decided to douse the fire so the wind wouldn't carry sparks to the dry leaves. I went to go carry some of our things back, and I saw something from the corner of my eye. A wolf. I immediately took a defensive posture, but as it looked at me with eyes that glowed warmly, and walked with its hackles down and tail up, I realized who it was. It was my friend. The wind gusted then, and his entire body shimmered, like he was made of mist held together by force of will. He looked into the wind, then back at me and whimpered slightly. I looked at him quizzically, but he had no way to tell me what was wrong. He followed me back to the house, and then back to the fire. It took a couple of trips to carry our drinks, our trash, and our chairs back to the house. Finally, we got everything. When Cody said he forgot his jacket, we took a flashlight and went to go get it. My red wolf pup was there on the trail blocking my way. He really wasn't a pup anymore, but I still think of him as that little pup that I met that one day. Cody ran right past him, but he wouldn't let me pass. I wondered what was wrong, but he gave a quick yip, and then there was movement behind him. Several more wolves, just like him, materialized out of the bushes and from around trees. They all had the same misty, shifting eyes, like a mirage, but their coats were silver. I didn't count them, but probably about 10 or 12. Probably more, actually. I took a step back. Crap. I'm dead, but the red one looked at me pleadingly. What the heck do you want? I thought. Cody stopped, noticing I had fallen behind, and turned back to ask what was up. He was standing 10 feet from me, shining a flashlight on a pack of wolves that he very obviously took no real notice of. They parted as he walked up to me, and I just stared at them incredulously. I told him nothing, that I thought I had spotted something, but it was nothing. The wind was picking up, so I held the flashlight while Cody rubbed his shoulders, and we basically ran to the fire pit. The pack followed. His jacket was there, still hanging on the tree where he'd left it. The fire was out completely, but there was still steam rising from it. Cody threw his jacket on and we turned to go, and I was really glad to leave. Not only was it windy, but the woods felt uneasy. When you spend enough time in the woods as I do, you gain an affinity for them. You just sort of feel when the land is off. Something was wrong, and I didn't need the misty pack of wolves that only I could see to tell me that. They helped, though. The trees creaked and groaned, and I could feel tremors in the ground like it was quivering. Afraid or angry, I couldn't tell, but there was a queasy feeling in my stomach like something was very, very wrong. I never thought I'd feel so glad to be in the company of shimmery, definitely not ordinary wolves. Cody tripped over a rock because he's an idiot who doesn't go into the woods often enough. Maybe I come in too often. Either way, he dropped the flashlight and broke it. He swore and complained about how we were going to get back. Looking around us, I decided I wasn't worried. The pack surrounded us now, at least 20, and I realized I could still see them. Silvery, misty wolf shapes that shimmered like a mirage, with eyes that glowed like soft wisps of smoke. Instead of facing inward, they all faced the way we had come, toward the house. The red one walked up to me and gently grabbed my hand, tugging on it. Okay. I put a hand on Cody's shoulder and told him I got this. Really? He asked. I nodded, and that was enough for him. My friends know I know the woods. I nodded to the red pup, and he started forward. I followed him, Cody followed me, and the pack followed all of us. They circled us too. I could see them shifting, rotating as they led us through the otherwise pitch-dark woods. Some of them looked over their shoulders, and when they did, their eyes shone with a fiery glare that made my blood chill. As I realized I had only ever seen their friendly eyes before, there were no questions in my mind now. The woods were uneasy, and these wolves were protecting us from something that would probably find us if we didn't leave, and that would not be a pleasant experience. Cody seemed calm with me next to him, and with a silvery pack of wolves surrounding us, I felt confident we could get back. But with the knowledge I'd deduced, it was hard to relax. When we got back, I didn't bother looking behind me. I knew they would just retreat into the dark like the red one always did. I gave a backhand wave as we rushed to the house, and we all sat down to play cards. Later, I mentioned to Devin that I'd met a pack of wolves and his eyes went wide. I think he actually believed me. He said he had never seen any wolves, but the woods back here had plenty of spirits, some more friendly than others. And it was possible I'd met something benevolent. I opted not to tell him that we had most likely nearly met something not so benevolent. He didn't show it, but I think he knew. It had been his call to douse the fire, after all. I don't know what these wolves are, or why they appear to me, or why so seldom. I think they're protecting me, but again, I don't know why. Maybe it's because I respect the woods, or maybe they just like me. I don't know. I've only seen the full pack one other time, also on a dark and windy night. The red pup has come to me several times, sometimes for company, but nearly always to lead me out of the woods when it grows dark. I've never had anything to offer him, and I don't know how to summon him. I don't live in that town anymore, but every time I return, it has new surprises for me. Those woods are old, and some very strange things have been seen there. Though most people don't believe what they see, I do. I have a very nice car. More specifically, I built that car, part from part. It was the result of years of sleepless nights, countless hours spent in the garage, powerful as fuck, yet nimble as a cat. Some street kids call it the Italian Stallion. Yes, like Rocky. I made sure it had the loudest exhaust pipe I could find so I could get back to my neighbor Steve by revving it up at 4 in the morning. Steve, if you're reading this, fuck you. I'd won a lot of races at the local drag strip, and even some on the street. People lined up from far away just to get left in the dust. I won a lot of big bets this way. This might seem like an exaggeration, but just ask my mate Steve. That's some other guy, not my neighbor. Again, fuck you, Steve. I hope my dog pisses on your flower bed. Really, I had built my car for one thing and one thing only. To beat a Tesla. So my town has this legend, or just a campfire story, I don't know which. There is a road through the woods leading out of the town. It is perfectly fine to drive, but the story says that if you put a piece of paper on the first speed limit marker and come back 1 week later at exactly 12 of the night, alone in your car, there will be a dude waiting for you. People call him the Rider from Hell. Ghost Rider, but with a car. His car has no markings, no number plate, nothing. Howls like 1,000 wolves. Runs on nothing but the souls of the doomed. No one knows about his origins. He was just there. You were to race against him. You will hear 3 bell rings. The third one is the green light. The road will be absolutely straight and will stretch out for 70 miles. Time will stop. Just you and him and your cars. If you fail to show up, he will find you and kill you. If you lose, he will kill you. But if you win, you get a reward. Enough gold to last a lifetime if spent wisely. No one knew if this was true. Some teens tried this with Honda Civics. Every one of them were found dead. Cars overturned, snapped necks, steel through the body, shit like that. These deaths were just regarded as reckless driving mishaps. One day I was with my mates, drinking at the pub. I don't know who started it, but all of a sudden all of them just wanted me to race against the rider. Look bro, that Butte can outrun a motherfucking Tesla. Dang thing's faster than the world. You're gonna be fine, Steve said. Fuck you, Steve. Both of you. They eventually managed to drag me to the first speed limit marker. In our drunken state, we tried to beat it down with a bat, ramming into it and all the other stupid shit that drunk guys would do. When I left a piece of paper with the words, fuck you, scrawled on them. When I got sober, I was scared. I made sure to message Steve. Both of them. Then the night came. I pulled up to the side of the speed marker on the road. There he stood. Legend himself. Black leather jacket. Just a skull for a face. Apart from his head, no part was exposed. The smell of burning flesh and leather filled the air. My eyes drifted to his car. It was an old-style muscle car. Dark black, darker than the darker night. The number plate, well, there was no number plate. The wheels, they were glowing, red hot like metal. I thought my heart would bust out of my rib cage. Praise God it didn't. I got in my car and pulled up beside him. Then I heard the bells, deep, echoed through the woods. On the third one I floored the gas. My car was quicker than his. Heck, the speedometer was not working. It seemed faster than the wind. In the rearview mirror, I could see his car leave trails of fire on the road. I could see him slowly catching up. His engine howled like 1,000 wolves. At the same time, I heard millions of screams. My ears rung. It was just about the last 20 miles I hit the nitrous. I didn't cut it. I had to win this race. I just willed the car not to explode from the prolonged use of the nitrous. The engine screamed. It was well past 20,000 RPMs. Thankfully, the transmission didn't explode. It took me 3 whole kilometers to slow down. The rider pulled up beside me. I was scared to get out. He stood behind my car, and then I cautiously got out. He handed me 2 skulls, made of gold and filled with gold. There was a piece of paper inside one. He got on his knees in front of me. The smell was obnoxious. He motioned for me to put the gold in the car. I did. Then he grabbed my hand. His touch was hot, almost burning. His strength was unbelievable. I wanted to run away, but couldn't. He was too strong. He grabbed my hand and put it on his head. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For putting me out of my misery." With that, his skull crumbled to ashes. So did his whole body and his car. Remember the piece of paper? It said that the rider was a curse. The winner will be the new rider. With that came immortality and other powers such as possessing the Force. Yes, the Star Wars one. And the ability to make people forget things. Forget that you are centuries old. The last, he revealed his identity. He was the town sheriff. I am the new rider now. Please find me and race. Please have a better car than mine. Please put me out of my misery. Please. I beg you. In 2019, I was an employee at Disney World's Magic Kingdom. I worked at various places around the park to include at the main entrance guest admissions. I'm a bit shy, from a small town in Rehoboth, Massachusetts. Before moving to Orlando, I was never really exposed to anyone besides farmers. While working at the admission kiosk one afternoon, I was stationed right next to the exit aisle where guests are funneled to leave the park. It was mid-August at about 2 p.m., and the mad rush of the day's traffic had died down dramatically. As I stood at my booth, a woman in her early 70s was waiting for the rest of her family to meet her at the exit. The woman, who had light dark skin, leaned over to me and said, "It's no good in there," in a thick South American accent. We're taught as cast members to be cheery and optimistic regardless if it's 100 degrees and there's a 2-hour wait for each ride. So I responded in a perky voice. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Today was a bit busy and hotter than usual, but did you know there's other things you could do?" Then she cut me off and said, "No, it's not that. Darkness lives in there." Kind of rolled my eyes a little when she said that, and I thought to myself, this is the only magical place on Earth. I foolishly responded, "What makes you think that?" The woman responded, "My Roma culture, that has been passed down to me for hundreds of years in Argentina, has instilled in me with a sense of evilness, and it's trapped in certain environments." I thought to myself, okay, this lady's probably gone off the rocker. I jokingly said in a perky voice, "Humans, service animals, Disney characters, and ghosts can all leave through this exit way right here, where you're standing." The elderly woman picked up on my sarcasm but wasn't all that thrilled. She told me, "You will have thousands of people who will come through these gates, but no one has the knowledge that I will tell you. You see, evilness doesn't feed off goodness. It needs other evilness to travel. I can tell you that there's evilness trapped in there, but why it can't transfer itself out is something I can't explain. The next time during a lightning storm, pay very close attention at the exit area towards the ground or right after a big rainstorm where the clouds turn black, then the sun is really intense. Look inside the shadows of puddles." I was kind of taken aback by everything this older woman had to say. It was really the absolute last thing I would have ever thought about, was evil souls within the Magic Kingdom. Fast forward about a week later to another one of my job roles where I stand in front of an assigned ride entrance and smile and tell the guests that there was no eating or drinking allowed once they entered the mine train. It rained every day in August, but this one storm was cataclysmic, where the clouds turned completely black and it didn't stop for 2 hours straight. The park had basically emptied out, but it was my job to stand in front of the entrance to the ride regardless. Knowing how Orlando's weather typically changes, and it eventually did, and because the park had emptied out, I was just so atypically bored staring down at the puddles of water that had caused little streams. Because the clouds were so black, it appeared as though the brightest sun came out. I was dozing off in my own world when I said, "I'm sorry, sir. The mine train is temporarily closed down still because of the weather." My coworker standing next to me laughed at me and said, "Grace, who are you talking to?" Though I was voted the underachiever of the year my senior year in high school, I had tested into the gifted program and my brain was pretty good at aligning past subtle things to present situations. So hearing my coworker laugh at me made something in my mind instantaneously put together what the older woman from the previous week told me to glance at the puddle. I could see the shadow of the man in the puddle drift away towards the Tomorrowland Speedway ride. Then I ran as I saw the figment of the shadow go through a gate of the Speedway. Then I lost track of him as he headed towards the back of the ride. I was left completely speechless. I know what I saw, and what I saw was a man in his 30s wearing a vintage rugby shirt with jeans, and he was holding something smallish and narrow looking in his right hand. I know my coworker was going to think I was crazy for talking to somebody who didn't exist, then running after the imaginary person. So I dropped a $5 bill in the water and picked it up and told her that I ran after money I saw floating by. I gave her the $5 bill and told her I'll keep the other one, which made her forget about me addressing the shadow. I was at a complete loss for words. My millennial self was certain to be an atheist, but everything changed in 10 seconds. That Roma woman had put the thought in my head which I probably had seen dozens of times but never focused on. I had these awful goosebumps go through me because I had no idea what these souls were possible of doing. I asked myself, what is the definition of good versus bad? Am I good or am I bad? I wish I knew someone I could raise these questions to. I'm an only child and I raised myself to be a bit of an independent at times. My shift ends at 11 p.m. and this is the most terrifying day of my life. I don't know if one of the trapped souls in the park will jump a ride within me. My gritty self couldn't muster more than an awkward hi to guests coming onto the ride when the mine train eventually reopened. I really didn't care if they ate or drank. I always heard stories of people appearing perfectly normal then seemingly lose all touch with reality, and now I'm definitely wondering if some traveling soul got within their bodies and caused them to do evil things. The mine train closed at 11 p.m. that night, and I didn't know what to do to prevent my body from being invaded. My parents made me receive Catholic communion, but then they put me in weekly Catholic classes, so I kept on repeating the Hail Mary over and over again until I got to my car. When I got to my apartment, I did as much research as possible on parasitic evil souls needing a host to travel. I did online references in the Gypsy, Roma culture, and it seemed to summarize that there needed to be some type of evil deed performed for the parasitic evil soul to engulf itself within the new host. I stayed up all night and racked my brain thinking, why now are these evil souls trapped in the park? Disney is Disney, and very little has changed over the years. There has always been an ample amount of security, and with social media, the smallest things get posted everywhere. My mind was overconsumed trying to come up with a reason, and I kept on getting nowhere. My once beloved hot weather job had turned into a literal haunted graveyard to me. I had requested to work only at the front gate because I knew the evil parasitic souls couldn't get past the gate. All those tales I thought were fictional, like vampires who couldn't enter a home without being invited, were also true for evil parasitic souls who needed one soul to enter a residence, then a different evil host to exit a residence, and apparently the front entrance and exit gates to the Magic Kingdom constituted as a residence. There was a terrible lightning and thunderstorm in September after the park had closed, so just for the heck of it, I stayed around a little later and watched the ground by the exit gates to see if I could see any of the wandering evil parasitic souls. Sure enough, they were like mosquitoes attracted to lights, and how they all congregated by the front gate. I stayed the furthest away I could from them while I was still able to make out a lot of features about them. All of the souls looked weathered, meaning none of them could be models. There was a certain feature about them, like they didn't care of their skin or something. Obviously they were all desperate to leave. All the souls were just looking for any type of abhorrent behavior so they could jump ship. I was seriously contemplating quitting my job. I felt like a Victorian person being told there's germs everywhere that we can't see, which is good to know to avoid them, but who wants to know there's a world filled with fecal-infested E. coli on everything we touch? I wanted to stick around at the job at least until October because my parents were coming for a visit. I could get them free tickets and in front of the lines for most of the rides. I haven't gone inside the gates in days. I might just let my parents go by themselves. We had a staff meeting inside the park and I told my supervisor that I wasn't feeling well and he just let me go home. I made it to October and my parents arrived in Orlando. I didn't want them to worry about me, so I went inside the park with them. Once I entered the park, every footstep I heard was absolutely terrifying. I hadn't made it past the main entrance Main Street area in weeks, and I felt like I was in a war zone. I knew I wasn't a saint. There were countless boys that I had dated for no other reason to make another girl jealous or just because I was bored than just to dump them. Also, I didn't want the parasitic evil souls to thrust themselves inside my parents because I didn't know what darkness my parents were hiding. My parents saw that I was visibly shaking, so I had to do something to make it stop. I knew there was a nearby first aid station, so I went in and told the nurse I was having allergy problems, which she gave me Benadryl, which I knew had a natural anti-anxiety effect. A few minutes later, I felt a little bit better, but I was still terrified. I knew these souls were just looking for a host, and me and that Argentinian woman were the only people who knew they were lurking around the park. We got to the mine train ride, which my parents enjoyed, but they could tell that I was not having a good time. I was really trying to do everything to keep myself together, but the Benadryl was losing its effect. My parents wanted to go on the Tomorrowland Speedway, and I was in no position to actually drive the car, but I could just sit next to my dad. I really felt so bad because I was really breaking his heart by shaking and having nervous convulsions. As he drove around the track, he knew I was just too out of it to converse with him, but he talked to me anyway. Then my father said something that I had totally overlooked. As he rounded the corner towards the back of the Speedway ride, he pointed and said, "I remember my father taking me back there like every half hour to the designated smoke area when I was a little kid so we could have a smoke." That's when it dawned on me that the park had recently discontinued smoking within the park. She was standing outside my house. At first, I thought she was just a neighbor going for a walk. You know how it is with the pandemic. When it was time to take my dog for her walk, we passed by this woman and I recognized her, but couldn't figure out from where. She wore her black hair in a tight bun sitting on the crown of her head, and I could only see the top half of her face with the mask, but it was clear she had makeup on. Sharp, black eyebrows painted, dark brown shadow with a thick black eyeliner, and too much mascara on. Or maybe it wasn't a good brand. It made her eyelashes look like spider legs. I nodded to her as our eyes met when I passed her. She didn't respond, so I turned away to keep it from getting awkward. It was a cold and windy morning. My dog loves this weather, so she was running around as much as the leash would let her. When we finished our walk, she wanted to stay outside. She's the cutest. When I looked up from trying to coax my dog back in, I saw the lady again. She was staring at me and standing in the exact same spot as before. I got that feeling again that I knew her, but I couldn't remember how. I sort of knew some of my neighbors. It's hard to meet new people in a new city during a pandemic. The few I had met were because they also had friendly dogs who liked to play and sniff with my dog. This lady was not someone I recognized from here, though. Upstairs in my apartment, I fed my dog and made myself coffee. I could not stop thinking about that woman outside. There was something about her that was bugging me. Something inside me was telling me I knew her and I needed to avoid her. Maybe I was confusing her with someone else. I had no idea how I was going to get any work done with her on my mind. I opened up my computer and got my work programs and headset running. I work as a tech support rep for a cell phone company, and thankfully, my office lets us work from home. I don't miss my boss breathing down my neck about productivity or whatever. Most of the people who call are older and trying to figure out how their new phones work. I get how some people might cut and run at the sound of helping someone older figure out technology over the phone, but I find it rewarding. A lot of these people are grandparents and just want to talk to their grandkids. I'm happy to help with that. I take my seat with my coffee and a pink concha. We're not supposed to eat during work, but as long as I'm careful, it's not super obvious. Anyway, I have my headset on and I'm logged in. The first call comes in, a woman who wants me to hack into her daughter's phone. We don't really do that, so I encourage her to have an open conversation with her daughter. She opts to cut the service off temporarily, so I do. Next call, an older man whose phone won't turn back on. The phone is 3 years old and he has insurance, so I order him a replacement. Next call, there is a slight tapping and brushing sound, like something being brushed against the speaker. I give my greeting again. Usually when there's no answer after that, I'll say, "Hello? Do you have me on mute?" A couple of times just in case before hanging up. Sometimes, it's someone who put the phone on speaker and started doing something else while they wait. On my second, "Hello?" I felt something tickle my ear. I knocked the headset off my head and picked it up to see what it was. Probably some fabric from my sweater or a dog hair that got trapped in the edges of the earpiece. It looked like two small black fingers trying to grasp something. I looked closer and realized it was a kind of bug that was stuck in the headset and trying to pull itself out. How did that happen? I kept my apartment pretty clean and never left food or dirty dishes out. I got out my personal Bluetooth headset and connected it to the computer. The call was still going, so I had some time to get connected and see if anyone was on the line before hanging up. I looked at the bug poke more legs out to push itself out from the earpiece. The legs reminded me of the mascara on that lady outside. Something about that creeped me out. Now, before we go on, I just want to clarify. I support women and love women. Makeup, no makeup, good makeup, bad makeup, into yoga, into gaming, whatever. It's all good and I support women living their best lives. When I am telling you the eyelashes of this woman outside resembled spider legs, I don't mean in a nasty or cruel way. Normally when I see someone who put too much makeup on, I think, whoa, they didn't stop when they should have. Or something like that. I don't normally compare someone's features to insects. I think it was more than heavy makeup making me associate the woman outside with spiders. Maybe her eyelashes were what I recognized. The bug managed to squeeze itself out of the earpiece. My eyes and mouth dropped open in shock. It was a spider. A whole spider just squeezed out of my earpiece. Ew. It was the next call and I had to answer it after seeing a spider crawl out of my work earpiece. What was going on today? I answered it and listened as well as I could, backing up towards my kitchen to get a short glass and paper towel to trap the spider. My dog was napping in a sunspot on my bed. So as long as she stayed there and didn't get near the spider, I was going to be okay. Hello? I apologized to the caller. The spider was really stressing me out and I was not listening. It moved to the right side of my desk and stood there. Maybe it was stressed out too. I told the caller the line cut out for a minute while they were talking and asked if they could explain their tech issue again. I got the glass and paper towel, then walked back slowly to my desk and sat, avoiding sudden movements. I didn't want to scare the spider away. The caller needed a phone replacement. I made small talk about the caller's phone and insurance plan while I placed the glass on top of the spider. I breathed a sigh of relief and finished ordering the replacement for the caller. When the call ended, I got the paper towel ready and was about to slide the glass onto it when another call came in. Someone was having a hard time activating a new phone. I guided them through the steps and saw the phone appear active on their account. I told them they were good to go, and the call ended. Another call. Why was it so busy today? I found my answer. The caller's area had an outage, and it was my area too. I checked my phone and turned off Wi-Fi. No service. Great. I turned Wi-Fi back on and checked the ticket. The outage started this morning and they were working on it. I submitted a ticket for the caller. It would be ignored since it was the same issue as the initial ticket, but it made the caller feel better. Next call, another ghost call, with no sound on the other end. I asked if anyone was on the line, and on the second one, something tickled my ear. I snatched the earbud out and looked at it. Bug legs moving, but this time, from the small speaker on my earbud. I kept these in a case. There is no way a spider could have gotten in there, and yet, there it was with its legs poking out, working its body out of this impossibly small space. I set the earbud down and glanced over at the spider in the glass. It was still there, staring at me. There was no answer, so I hung up and braced myself for the next call while this second spider crawled out of my Bluetooth earbud. I checked the case for the earbuds and it looked clean. I went over it with a distinctive wipe. I'm not sure if that keeps spiders away. I hoped it did. Next call came in. It was about the outage. I explained the outage was already reported and being repaired, but offered to write a ticket if the caller wanted. They were satisfied that we knew about it and it was being worked on. The spider finished pulling itself out of the earbud and walked over to the other spider in the glass and stood there, facing me. I stared at this and almost fumbled my greeting for the next call. It was also about the outage. I checked the company website to see if we had an alert for the outage. Normally, people check the site for outages before calling. It was announced on there and I let the caller know that they could check in the future to save themselves a phone call, which they appreciated. I picked up the earbud the spider had crawled out of and wiped it with a disinfectant wipe. I set the desk lamp a little closer and looked in at the small speakers. There was something coming from there. I put it closer to my ear to try and hear it. I told you I would come for you if you ever forgot me. A woman's voice said that over and over again. I thought maybe my earbud connected to something else while the spider was crawling out. I checked the Bluetooth connection for the computer and it said my earbuds were still connected. It's possible it was just referring to the earbud I still had on. I wiped the earbud with the disinfectant wipe again and put it in its case. The lights flickered like it was charging, but the same woman's voice was coming from it. I looked over at the two spiders and they were still in the same spots on my desk, almost like little statues. I took a few more calls and more outage complaints and someone who wanted to know if they could use their phone in another country. Then it happened again. A ghost call and then the tickle in my ear. I went on break and left my earbud on the desk. I checked on my dog and she was snoozing, but she did pop her head up when I came in. I used the bathroom and checked on my phone as spiders normally hide in earpieces. There was a lot of articles on spiders being found in headphones, but nothing on earbuds like mine. I also saw a lot of articles about people finding spiders and other kinds of bugs in their ears, and I was not brave enough to click on any, but apparently, it's common. I tried to look up the type of spider they were to see if they were poisonous. I know it's the first thing I should have done, but I didn't think of it until then. The closest thing it looked like was a black widow, although it didn't have the bright hourglass or dot marking. Or maybe it did and I didn't notice it. Either way, it was probably poisonous and I shouldn't keep them around. I put my phone away and finished using the bathroom, walking out into my bedroom as I rubbed lotion on my still damp hands. My dog wasn't on the bed anymore. I looked around and didn't see her in her usual spots. I ran out to my desk and saw all 3 spiders there, neatly lined up like toy soldiers. I heard gulping on the other side of the room and saw my dog drinking her water. I let out a sigh of relief and fenced her into that area so she would be away from the desk. She didn't seem happy about it and whined, but I didn't want to risk the spiders jumping off and biting her. I wasn't sure what to do about me either. They seemed fine, lined up on my desk, and weren't crawling around causing trouble. I had 1 minute left for my break. I got a disinfectant wipe and started cleaning my earbud. A voice was coming from it. I panicked, thinking it was a call that managed to get through. I put it to my ear and it was that same woman's voice. "I told you I would come for you if you ever forgot me." I felt some relief. It was just picking up the same audio from last time. I went to the Bluetooth settings to reconnect it, and it was still connected. I looked through my tabs and windows to see if I had something playing by accident. It was just the company website and the programs for my job. The only audio would be from a phone call. My earbuds were probably connected to something else, and I did not have time to figure that out. So I quickly wiped down my regular work headset and triple-checked the earpiece. I was a couple of minutes late from break, but I'd just take a shorter break next time. That voice sounded familiar. Was it from a movie? Maybe the Bluetooth signal on my tablet was too strong. I really needed a normal explanation for all this weird stuff going on with the spiders and the audio. I put the earbud in the case to charge. I guess without bones, it's easier for spiders to end up in very small spaces. The spiders on my desk looked to be about an inch long. That's when I remember she used to talk about spiders. I had this babysitter about 25 years ago who would tuck me into bed at night with my brother. We were 5 and 6 years old. When we asked her for a story, she would tell us about swarms of spiders coming to eat children who didn't go to sleep like they were told. She was not the most nurturing person, and my mom let her go when she saw the kinds of things she was teaching me. For some reason, this babysitter encouraged me to play with knives and spiders. I don't remember exactly what happened other than my mom coming home, the car ride to the emergency room, and getting a lollipop from the doctor who saw me. I wasn't bitten or injured, but I never saw that babysitter again. I did talk to her one more time, though. She called me after school and I picked up the phone. She told me. I gasped. She told me that I'd better not forget her, or she'd come for me. That voice. Another call. I half expected another ghost call with a spider surprise, but it was just an older woman who needed help setting up her wireless router. I walked her through it, glancing at the spiders on my desk. It was probably all a coincidence anyway. The voice that could have been from a movie. Spiders crawling out of my equipment. The woman with those eyelashes outside. The woman from outside. I knew she looked familiar, but she still looked like she was in her 20s. By now, she would have been closer to 50. The router was set up and working, so I let the caller go. So if this lady was my former babysitter, why was she here, and what did she want? I crossed my arms and looked at the spiders. Were they even real spiders? I started to reach my hand out, but grabbed a pen instead and poked the spider closest to me. It shifted and moved away, but then came back to its spot next to the others. It looked pretty real. Next call. An older man asking how to set up voicemail on his new phone. While I helped him, I kept wondering about the lady outside. Maybe she was someone else, or if she was my old babysitter. Maybe I was too distracted by the makeup to notice any signs of her being older. Maybe she had some work done. What was her name? Is it working okay, sir? The caller was checking to see if his voicemail worked. He said it did, and we ended the call. I was hoping it would be a slower day so I could figure out what was going on. Next call, no answer. I took off my headset and held it close enough to where I could listen, but not have it touch my ear. Sure enough, 2 legs poked out and flailed a bit before pulling the rest of the body out. It's like these spiders were being generated from the speaker. There is no way 2 of these could fit in there. The rest of the workday went by pretty much like that. The outage still hadn't been resolved. My desk is now lined with spiders standing at attention. I remember my old babysitter. On the walk with my dog after work, she was still there. This time I said, "Hi, I remember you. You used to babysit me." I started to walk away and then I heard her say, "Nothing." I chickened out and didn't say anything to her. I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Part of the reason I like my job is I don't have to actually see the people I talk to. I still have a ways to go with in-person interaction. Plus, that lady makes me nervous, especially since she was a mean babysitter. She used to talk about gutting my black cat for a ritual sacrifice and would have me sit with her in the bathroom with all the lights off and only red candles lit. My brother would be outside crying and she said before I could leave, I had to make some promises to her over these candles. I thought it was a weird game because she didn't realize Twister and Candyland existed, but even after showing her those games, we still did that bathroom thing. In retrospect, I think she was into some satanic ritual stuff. The kinds of things that only exist in horror movies and the moral panic of the 1980s. The Satanists I know are members of the Church of Satan and very nice people who emphasize consent, something this babysitter never got from me for all her rituals. Anyway, I'm writing here to ask if anyone knows what to do. I've texted a few friends, including the Satanists, and haven't heard back. Kind of afraid she'll hurt me or my dog if I acknowledge her. I'm writing from the kitchen with my dog and keeping us both away from my desk. The spiders have all raised their 2 front legs, and I don't know what that means.